there's the map for upstairs. We're going to follow this plan here. Again, follow the numbers in red. The room numbers are in green, just like you are downstairs. Open to page 12. Now, we're going back in history. We ended with the 8th century, actually the 7th century downstairs. Now we're going back to 1900 BC. Way back. I know it's confusing. You just remember the page 3. Look at the timeline again. So we ended off with a Syrian period. You see that? All the way back to the beginning of the Black Line. Right? So that's what we're doing now. Unfortunately, it'd be great if we could have started here and moved our way along the timeline. But again, the British Museum is not set up that way. It's set up by geography, not by chronology. Looking on page 12. Abraham has always been questioned. In fact, the book of Genesis has always been questioned by the historians. And the reason why is very simple. There are many events that happen in the book of Genesis that are cataclysmic. There should be some form or some material that still exists today that shows those events happened. And most historians assume, therefore, that the book of Genesis is nothing more than fiction. We're going to see that when we get to the Gilgamesh epic, because they talk about the same events you see in the book of Genesis. And of course, the historians would assume those are the origins for those stories. Now, here's the irony. What they would say then is that much of the books of Moses, that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those first 5 books, were more than likely written in the 5th century after the Gilgamesh epic were created and redacted back to someone named Moses. But here's the irony.
Smash that to the ground.
When you look at the stories about Abraham in the book of Genesis, they're very specific customs or mentioned. Very specific customs. Now, since this criticism has come up, there have been 4 different schools of tablets that have been discovered. Like the tablets you see right here. These are called the Amarna tablets from Egypt. But there are even earlier tablets that have been discovered. The Nuzi tablets from Mesopotamia. The Mari tablets from the Euphrates Valley, present-day Iraq, where Abraham lived, where he grew up. That was the area that Abraham came from. From the same time period that Abraham was living. Because these were tablets that were written between 2000 BC and 1600 BC. Abraham lived in 1900 BC. So it's the same time period that Abraham lived and the same area that Abraham came from. The Ebla tablets, which are even earlier, 2300 BC, from Syria. And it's these tablets that are starting to show us not only the environment that Abraham came from, but also the same time period, showing that the customs that Abraham experienced, almost exactly the same customs that we find in the Genesis account. How do we know that? Let's take a look. Let's look at some of these tablets and let's unpack them a little bit. On page 12, the Mari tablets, written from 2800 to 1700 BC. They were found near what is today Kirkuk, which is northern Iraq. They mention King Ariuk, which is found in Genesis 14. They list the towns of Neha and Harak from Genesis 24. And the names of the Benjamin, and the people known as the Habiru. Who are these Habiru?
Hebrews.
We're going to come back to that. Don't jump to your conclusion yet. We're going to come back to that name. Very important. The Nuzi tablets are even more exciting, because they come from the exact same area that Abraham lived, from the same time period that Abraham lived. Now they talk about the Horites. See, many historians have always said that there are 2 peoples in the Genesis account that have never been heard of before, the Hittites and the Horites. Therefore, they must be fictitious. They're nothing more than legend. Yet the Nuzi tablets talk about the Horites, proving the Bible's correct. These people did exist. These artifacts do mention them. But what's interesting is they talk about the customs of that day. The customs from the Euphrates Valley, where Abraham lived, in the same time period Abraham was living. Just take a look at page 12. They mention that a barren wife is given a handmaiden to her husband. We find that in Genesis 16 with the story of Hagar. That a bride is chosen for the son by the father. We find that in the story of Rebekah in Genesis 24. That a dowry is paid to the father-in-law in the story of Jacob in Genesis 29. That work is done to pay a dowry. The same story in the same place. The unchanging moral will of a father is sacrosanct. You see that in the story of Isaac in Genesis 27. That a father gives his daughter a slave girl is found in both the story of Leah and Rachel in Genesis 29. There's a sentence of death for stealing a cult god is found in the story of Jacob in Genesis 31. And that a man could call his sister, his wife, his sister, is found in the story of Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 12 chapter 20 and chapter 26. These are customs that are found in the biblical account, Genesis, that are exactly parallel to what we find in the Nuzi tablets, proving that we got the right customs at the right time with the right people. But here's what's interesting. Those customs all went out of date. They went all out of usage by 1600 BC. Now remember, stop and ask yourself, who wrote the Genesis account? Did Abraham write it? No, he didn't. Who wrote it?
Moses.
Moses. And when was Moses living?
1400.
In 1400 BC. Did Moses ever go to the Euphrates Valley? No, he did not. Did he ever go to Mesopotamia? No, he did not. So how did Moses know how to get these customs so accurate? How is it that Moses got every one of these customs so accurate, yet they've all been out of date for over 200 years from an area that he invented? See how accurate the Genesis account is? But it wasn't until we got the Nuzi tablets that we can now support the fact that actually these are the right customs at the right time with the right people in the right place. Oh, I love it. Let's get more accurate. Historians have always said that there are no cities called Sodom and Gomorrah. No reference to these cities in any ancient historical account. Thucydides, the other Herodotus, who are the great historians, they write about the histories of the ancient people, never refer to these two cities. Well, that would make sense. These cities did exist at the time of Herodotus. He was writing in the 5th century. It wasn't until they came across the Ebla tablets in Syria, they were traveling to the deserts of Syria, they come across one of these mounds called Tel Marduk. As they started digging down to the different layers, they came to 2300 BC. That's 400 years before Abraham. 400 years before Abraham, they came across an entire city that had been abandoned underground. They started digging away all the sand, and they came across one house. In that house was one room. In that room, on the floor of that one room, were 17,000 tablets, just like the tablets you see here. Now, what's great about tablets is they don't disintegrate, they don't deteriorate. They are as good today, you can see, they're as good today as the day they were made. And as they came across those tablets, they came across one tablet that mentioned 5 cities: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zebulun, and Zoar. The earliest and only references to Sodom and Gomorrah anywhere were found on that one tablet, proving that there was a Sodom and Gomorrah in 2300 BC. Abraham died in 1900 BC, so this is 400 years earlier. No wonder no one's heard about it. Proving that Sodom and Gomorrah did exist. Showing the Bible's accurate. Here's it gets even more exciting than that. Take a look at the sequence that I just told you. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zebulun, and Zoar. Have you heard that sequence before? Yeah. Where have you heard it?
Genesis.
In the book of Genesis. Do you know where?
15.
Chapter 14, verse 8.
No,
in Genesis chapter 14, verse 8, you will find the same 5 cities in the exact same order that they found on the Ebla tablets. Proving there's something important about that order. They now know what it is. That's a trade route. A trade route that starts in Sodom, goes to Gomorrah, then Admah, then Zebulun, then Zoar. Now we know where Admah, Zebulun, and Zoar are. They still exist today. Those are on a map. If you look on a map, you'll see it's a trade route. And it puts Sodom and Gomorrah somewhere in the Dead Sea. Because the Dead Sea has grown and grown and grown over the centuries. Therefore, they've been coming